this is the first thing that could actually work. The World Wide Web came along, and David Chaum formed a company called DigiCash. It was going to have a centralized service that everyone could use to do their online payments, but it would use his cryptographic ideas to protect the privacy of the users. So neither the centralized service itself nor anyone else could monitor the economic transactions of all the users. So we launched DigiCash, and it failed for various reasons, but probably the most permanent and inescapable reason, and the best lesson to learn from history, is that DigiCash was technologically centralized. So people knew that they couldn't rely on it to outlive the company, and so they didn't rely on it for much. When I worked at DigiCash, I remember, I was 21 years old, 22 years old or something when I worked there, and David Chaum was the gruff elder genius. He was the CEO of the company. He was famous for being sort of gruff. Like, I remember one of the other scientists once told me, okay, the thing about him is he's so brilliant that he's gonna leap ahead and know where you're going as soon as you start talking. So you've gotta start with the right half of a sentence, or else he's gonna lose interest. I remember pigeonholing or buttonholing David Chaum in the hallways a couple times. I'm like, oh, David, check this out. I've got a new idea for how we can make money decentralized. And he would listen for a couple of minutes, and he would point out some fatal flaw. And anyway, that was really fun. It was a great way to learn. So even back then, I was struggling to figure, could you have something that didn't rely on this central organization or central server or whatever? And I couldn't figure out any ways to do it. And I tried, and other cypherpunks tried during those years, like Nick Szabo and Wei Dai. And I just, I struggled. I went back and counted one time. I spent about 12 years of evenings and weekends while I was working on Mojo Nation, Tahoe LAFS, other things, trying to figure out how we could have decentralized money. I saw Bitcoin, and at first I didn't think it would work. I guess I'd almost convinced myself decentralized money was fundamentally impossible. There's something about physics or math which says certain things can never work. Maybe decentralized money is one of those things that can never work. So when I saw Bitcoin, I was like, I don't know, it's probably got some fatal flaws. There's so much, the different players have to coordinate and synchronize so much. They all have to have the same clock or timestamps as each other. That'll probably not work. Once it scales up big enough, it'll probably fall apart. But then I remember there was this website. Well, as you may know, I interacted a little bit with Satoshi at that time because he was clearly part of our community. In his style and in his political motivations and in his activism, he was absolutely the cypherpunk open source hacker culture, which is we want to change the world for the better and to free people. That's the goal. And the mechanism of action is we're going to write a bunch of code. It was Eric Hughes, the cypherpunk founder, who said that. He said, cypherpunks write code. Satoshi was clearly part of that tradition, even though he was a newcomer, at least to his name. I still don't know if he was one of the original cypherpunks under a new pseudonym or if he was a newcomer, but he joined our culture. But we chatted a few times on the forum and stuff. He posted his original white paper to one of the mailing lists, which was the successor of the Cypherpunks mailing list once the Cypherpunks list had gotten overrun by spam, and so some of the Cypherpunks decamped and they went to Perry Metzger's cryptography mailing list. But Perry had a rule with the cryptography mailing list: no politics. So it was take the Cypherpunks, which was all about politics and technology, ban the politics part, and that became the cryptography mailing list. So it was kind of interesting because everyone kind of knew where everyone else was, what wavelength we were on the politics page. We never talked about it on the cryptography mailing list because that was the rule. Anyway, that's where Satoshi posted the Bitcoin white paper.
So did you have any sense before the white paper came out or before Bitcoin became a thing, did something like that could come out soon? Or was it really kind of out of the blue for you? You had just been thinking about it for a decade now, a little longer.
Yeah, 12 years. I wrote a blog post about Bitcoin. I'm the author of the first blog post on the internet about Bitcoin. And in it, I say something like, there is a possible thing which we at DigiCash failed to do, and things like Second Life gold or World of Warcraft gold, they also aren't quite the thing. There's a possible thing which is actually decentralized money, which no one can be locked out of. No one can inflate the currency. No one can censor or surveil the transactions. And that would be way better. It would be, as I said in that blog post, the digital equivalent of gold in those times and places when gold was the universal store of value and the universal medium of exchange. And then I say, and check out this attempt by this Satoshi Nakamoto guy. Which, because I figured, it was probably, like most attempts, was probably going to fizzle. But that's the first blog post on the internet about Bitcoin.
Could you kind of tell us, upon the arrival of Bitcoin, what your thinking was? Because you told us about the paper, but I think kind of a little bit more high level, like what this meant to you as you started seeing it take off.
Right. So I read the paper, and like a lot of people who knew too much and had tried and failed, I assumed that this also would fail in some way. Most of the experts, most of the old cypherpunks did the same with the paper when they first saw it. And when Satoshi put up the first web page about Bitcoin, he linked to my blog and to, I think, Wei Dai and Nick Szabo. I think there was 3 links, and I was one of them. And then a little while later, I saw some people actually using Bitcoin. There was a website and a discussion on a forum and stuff like that. I think they were maybe in the East Coast of the United States. They called themselves agorists or something like that. And what they were doing was unlicensed food sales. So like raw milk, you're not allowed to sell people raw milk without homogenizing it properly or whatever, or butter. I don't know exactly what it was. But for some reason it struck me as really funny that was their form of civil disobedience. Like they rejected smashing the windows of the bank or whatever, because that would be violence, which was against their principles. But they found it very moral to violate the local food safety laws or the national food safety laws. I don't know. But they were using Bitcoin for that. And then I was like, wow, I guess there is something to this. Like it's been months, it's the Lindy effect. Whatever survives long enough, then it becomes worth paying attention to. I'm like, wow, that thing apparently does work because people are using it for an actual purpose. So that's when I got really interested in Bitcoin. And of course, it spread and spread, right? More and more people found out about it. More and more people started using it. My old friend and collaborator, Hal Finney, was an essential contributor to Bitcoin from the early days. He was one of those people that I had worked with Phil Zimmerman on PGP decades before on the Cypherpunks list. He was a great contributor to the Cypherpunks list, and he was a great contributor to the open source movement, where some of them called him Gandalf because he would drop into their planning sessions, and he would give them all this wise advice, like, actually, you can use this cryptography in these ways and not the way you're doing it. And then he would disappear again. And so they called him Gandalf after the behavior of Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. Anyway, I love that guy. And he and the other early Bitcoiners really did an amazing job. It was the first time I had seen the open source cypherpunk ethos of changing the world by writing code actually start to work. Bitcoin started changing the world. And the long dry spell when I thought I was the last lonely cypherpunk and that mainstream culture had rejected privacy and consent as being achievable or as being valuable, that suddenly changed, and all these people showed up who did care about that. And I am eternally grateful to Satoshi Nakamoto. He changed history that way.
So after Satoshi releases Bitcoin, you are now aware of a possible flaw, though. And this, I believe, is something you discussed with Hal Finney and Satoshi.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Right. So among the other fatal flaws that I perceived in Bitcoin was the fact that it leaks everyone's information to everyone else. the problem that Satoshi set out to solve was the one that I had tried and failed to solve, which is how to make money decentralized. And the solution is we're not going to rely on any one party to keep track of things for us. Instead, everyone's going to keep track of everyone else's things. That's how to make it decentralized. But the inevitable problem with that is then you can't use it without exposing your own private actions to everyone else on the whole internet. And Satoshi and Hal and I and Nick Szabo and everyone involved, because we were all either old-time cypherpunks or at least a newcomer who's a member of the same tribe, in the case of Satoshi. That was like privacy and consent and decentralization were always our most important motivating values. So in the early days, all the Bitcoiners, privacy and freedom from the central bank's monetary policy were the two core motivating values of Bitcoin. But as a technologist and having struggled for decades on both decentralization and on privacy, I clearly saw that this was a total fail on the privacy side. Like, Satoshi's awesome, but he made many things that he did that were like naive. Like he did things the way that first-time cryptographers do them, and the more old hands know how that never works. And this was one of them. Was he said, well, everything is traceable. Everyone can see what everyone else does every single step of the way. But you could make a new address every time you want to do anything, and then try not to let your new address get linked to your old address. And Hal and me and everyone was like, that's never going to work. And Satoshi, was pretty well aware of it too. So he and some of the others had a discussion in public on the Bitcoin Talk forum, where Satoshi said, if only we could encrypt the transactions in the blockchain. And we could do that if only we could use zero-knowledge proofs to prove that the encrypted transactions are still correct. They're still following the rules. They don't forge money out of thin air. Nobody can give money to someone and then also give the same money to someone else, etc. Well, with zero-knowledge proofs, we could do all that, and then we could have what he said something like, a much better, more usable version of Bitcoin, is what he said, if we had zero-knowledge proofs. And unfortunately, when he wrote that in about 2009, 2010, we didn't. Humanity had not yet discovered how to make zero-knowledge proofs practical and efficient enough to use them in a blockchain. But I really love the fact that one of the words he used was usable, because one of the things that Nate Wilcox and I have always focused on is that usability is actually kind of the end goal and actually kind of the driving force. It's not like we invent some cool math and then later we're like, oh, hire a GUI designer to put a usable GUI on top. No, the reason to invent Zcash and use zero-knowledge proofs was the reason that Satoshi gave, was it would be more usable.
Can you explain that though? What do you mean by more usable?
Well, I can tell you what I meant, and I think it's probably the same things that Satoshi meant when he wrote that, is that if you give average everyday users like David's mom, am I allowed to point to David?
Yeah.
The guy over there. If you give them something, it needs to be meaningful and valuable to them on their own terms. Like you can't say, okay, learn how to be an operational security guru and make fake accounts and take multiple steps and cover your tracks, and then this will serve your purposes. There's another great, can I just ramble? There's another great hero of mine. His name is Moxie Marlinspike, and he's the inventor of Signal, the encrypted messenger. And he's one of the other people who came from the cypherpunk tradition. Cypherpunks write code that we're going to improve the world by creating a technological artifact that people can use, and that's going to improve the world. That was his tradition. But Moxie is a very eloquent and amusing and brilliant thinker and speaker. And he once gave a talk, which you can't find because he required us to turn the cameras off, and only the people who were in the room got to see the talk. It was when he accepted the award for the best cryptographic innovation of that year for Signal. And he said, the cypherpunks have always failed, and that's because their way of thinking about things was, first, we're going to build a tool that works for us, and then we're going to teach everyone else to be like us. And Moxie was like, that's not ever going to work. And in today's world, he said, I recently got the chance to meet Mark Zuckerberg face to face. And I was like, I could kill him. But that wouldn't really fix anything. Because in today's world, you've got to make something. Like if you have fewer than 100 million users, then you're nothing. You're doing nothing. It doesn't matter. You've got to have at least 100 million, a billion users. And in order to do that, you've got to make something that works for the way those people already are. So that's a long tangent to say, what do I mean by more usable? With Zcash style technology, which Satoshi envisioned when he talked about zero knowledge proofs with the other early Bitcoiners, you can give someone something and you can tell them, here's how it works. You store your money in here, you indicate how much you want to send and to whom, maybe by scanning their phone or by touching them in your address book or something. And you can include a note that tells them what it's for or whatever. And nobody else gets to find out what happened or gets to intervene and tell you whether you are or are not allowed to do that. It's just between you and the person you want to send to. That makes sense to my mom, right? That makes sense to the billion people that could benefit from this. So that I think that's what Satoshi meant by a much better and more usable version of Bitcoin. So I was aware of that conversation Satoshi had with the other Bitcoiners about whether we could use zero knowledge proofs. I was aware that there was no zero knowledge proof science that had yet been discovered that would work for that. So they gave up at that time. And then several years later, new improved zero knowledge proof science was discovered by other scientists. And then I found out about this paper. There were two papers. The first one was named Zero Coin, was the title of the science paper. And the second paper was titled Zero Cash. And they were both a scientific outline for how you could implement that imagination that Satoshi had had, where you could encrypt the transactions in the blockchain and add a zero knowledge proof to prove that the encrypted transaction is correct. And I was so excited when I read those papers, especially the second one, which was more practical and usable, like it was fast and efficient, so users would find it easy to use. And I said, this is the first thing that could actually work. That was, the Zero Cash paper was the first thing that could both be decentralized and private. And I knew one of the authors, I guess the lead author of the Zero Cash paper, his name was Matt Green. And I knew him because he had known about our work with Tahoe LAFS, the encrypted file system. I remember he presented that paper, Matt Green did, at a science conference, and I was in the audience. And I was so excited. I'd already read it, but he gave this whole presentation, and it included this sort of critical stumbling block, which was, in order to use these efficient zero-knowledge proofs to give a more usable, better version of Bitcoin, the first thing that could actually be decentralized and private, but there's this critical problem or stumbling block, which is somebody has to generate the parameters. They have to generate this cryptographic structure. And if the person who generates that cryptographic structure secretly keeps the secret key that they use to generate it, then they will be able to counterfeit money. And I was like, so close. Like, this is almost good enough. But I was like first in line at the microphone in the science conference. And he finished his presentation, and I said, okay, open it up for questions. And I was there, and I was like, but what about that key generation part? Because nobody will trust that you didn't keep a copy of the secret key, which would allow you to forge money, so then they can't trust the money, so then they won't use it. And he was like, we could have a computer set up under a video camera, and then we would generate the parameters, and then we'd destroy the computer by dropping it into lava or whatever. And I hogged the mic. You're supposed to ask your question, let the guy have his say, and then give the next person your question. But no, I was like, that's not good enough. And he was like, fine then, you figure it out. So that is in some sense the moment of inception when Matt and I started thinking about each other. Maybe we could help each other out here. So a little while later, he called me and I was so happy that he reached out to me. And he was like, we've been thinking about this thing, the zero cash idea. We'd really like it to become a real, like, industrial strength product or technology that anyone around the world can use the way Bitcoin is. And we're starting to realize that this is not going to happen as a side effect of our PhD theses. And would you be interested in like going in with us on this? And I was so honored, you know, and I thought, oh, that's so amazing. It's so close to being safe and usable if it's not quite there. But I said, I don't know. I'm in the middle of working on Tahoe LAFS, you know. And I thought to myself, Bitcoin has a head start. Bitcoin was probably going to be the mainstream thing that everyone's going to use. And if we make this thing and it's like a niche product, it's for the people who are the most paranoid about their security or whatever, and it's only used by, you know, a tiny fraction of all the users, then it won't change the world, you know? Like Moxie Marlin and Spike taught us, you have to have 100 million or billion users before you're changing the world, right? And unfortunately, there's not that many people who are willing to go the extra mile for their extra privacy or security. So I said, I don't know if I can give up everything else I'm doing and just focus on this. Sorry, man. But then I slept on it. And the next day I was thinking, you know what? All the everyday people, like businesses that need to pay their payroll and buy their materials and make partnerships, they all require privacy so that like industrial espionage or hackers or whatever aren't spying on them. That means if we did make this thing, it could become the mainstream thing that everyone needs all the time because they can't use Bitcoin for that. So I called him back and I said, you know what? I think I could let everything else go and just commit to doing this for now.